Hello, my name is Guy Jones and I'm the founder and manager of Fog Arts, which is a small digital jazz label based in Stockholm, Sweden. This podcast is the first of a series of discussions I'm having with artists, writers and others in the international jazz scene, whose work I like and admire. My first interviewee happily falls into both of these categories. He's the British saxophonist, composer, arranger and producer Jim Tomlinson. Born in the English Midlands in 1966, Jim's best known for his work with the American singer Stacey Kent, to whom he's been married for over 25 years. Jim and Stacey met in their early 20s, and in the near 3 decades since then, have performed and recorded together virtually non-stop. Stacey, Jim and their band fill concert halls the world over, right across North America and Europe, and on into Brazil, Japan and pretty much everywhere else in between. Stacey Kent's albums have sold over 2 million copies, and the music she makes with Jim Tomlinson has been streamed and downloaded tens of millions of times. Jim's profile received a huge boost last year when one of his collaborators, the British novelist Kazuo Ishiguro, was awarded the 2017 Nobel Prize for Literature. Ishiguro has written the lyrics for a number of Stacey Kent songs, for which the music was composed by Jim Tomlinson. Jim and Stacey's collaboration with Ishiguro was part of the reason Jim and I were able to get together on the 2nd of May 2018, when this interview was recorded. As well as being in Stockholm for a concert at Fashion Jazz Club that night, Jim and Stacey had given a talk the previous evening at the city's Nobel Museum about their work with Ishiguro. This talk is an event that we mentioned several times in our discussion, but we don't cover the subject in any detail since, as we say in the tape, so much has been discussed and written about it elsewhere. Instead, I wanted to focus on some of Jim's other musical partnerships and how his and Stacey's careers have been shaped by a combination of talent, experience, and, as Jim freely admits, some very large pieces of luck. So, against the backdrop of a sometimes quite noisy hotel lobby, we started our discussion at the very beginning of Jim Tomlinson's musical odyssey. Let's go back to your childhood, your boyhood, your adolescence. Tell me a bit about your musical provenance. Where does the music come from? Do you come from a musical family?
Not especially, no. For reasons that I've never gotten to the bottom of. When I moved from the Midlands up to Northumberland.
How old were you then?
At the age of 5, 6, something like that. So I basically grew up in Northumberland.
You were born in Sutton Coldfield?
Yeah. A town called Hexham, which has a very ancient and pretty abbey that had a good choir, and I got it into my head that I would like to join the church choir.
Right. What age?
Or the abbey
what
choir.
Age were you then?
I guess I would have been about 7 or 8.
Okay. Were you a church-going family? I mean, how did you stumble upon the
No,
choir?
not especially. My grandparents were church-going. And how did I stumble across it? I mean, maybe we went for Christmas or Easter or what have you.
Okay, so you sang first.
I sang
you weren't
first.
Playing those.
Sang first,
Right.
and I loved singing. Loved singing in the choir.
Right.
And
you still sing, because I saw you sing last summer in San Xavier in Spain.
Yeah. Well, thank you for calling it singing
in Portuguese.
Yes. Yeah.
Waters of March.
Yeah, which is quite a feat. I do speak Portuguese.
I know.
Which is another story.
Yeah.
But
we'll come to that as well.
Yeah. So the choir thing that occupied me pretty full on until my voice broke around the age 13, sort of 14. And it was a serious choir run by the guy who was the head of music at the local high school, called Terence Atkinson. A very fearsome disciplinarian, and so the commitment to the choir involved, it was 52 weeks a year, and it involved a rehearsal on Monday, a rehearsal and even song on Wednesday, a rehearsal on a Friday evening, and 2 services on Sunday.
Okay, so pretty intensive.
Yeah. And so it was a very kind of strong musical foundation.
And I assume you were doing music at school as well?
Well,
some capacity.
Yeah, here's the thing. So when I went from the junior school up to the middle school, there was the opportunity of learning an instrument, and I picked the clarinet.
Oh, okay, so that was the first.
So that was around age 10.
May I ask why the clarinet and not, I don't know, the piano or the guitar? Because I think you also played the guitar.
I didn't at that time, I do now. It was basically lots were drawn.
Okay. This is the only one we got, kid.
Yeah, my brother unfortunately drew the lot for the oboe, and he was.
He got the oboe.
It was not, it was not his instrument.
Okay. So you started with the clarinet.
So I started on the clarinet, and I was a passable clarinetist, but with all of my commitments to singing and interest in other things like
girls,
playing cricket in the summer and hanging out and studying. I didn't have very good practice habits, so I was a passable clarinetist. My motivation for switching to the saxophone.
But did you go through all the grades?
Yeah.
Yeah, you did all the exams.
Eventually. Yeah.
Okay.
My motivation for switching to the saxophone was primarily that I wasn't a good enough clarinetist to get into the county wind band. And because, Northumberland is a very big county, and there were lots of kids playing the clarinet, and basically no one played the saxophone at school in those days. I mean, now everyone plays the saxophone, so they needed saxophone players. They didn't need mediocre clarinet players.
Right.
So I found out that the school had a saxophone going spare. I nabbed it. Got some lessons. My
tenor sax.
Yeah. Was it tenor? I think it was tenor to begin with. I kind of floated between tenor and alto. My clarinet teacher, who was a fantastic musician, he was called Harry Carver, and he was one of these kind of old school bandsmen who seemed to be able to play everything equally well and to a virtuosic level. So he taught all of the woodwinds, and from oboe, bassoon, flute, clarinet, and saxophone. And he would be able to open up Otto Lange or whatever the kind of the study book was, Thurston and Frank, on any instrument. Just go to the page of scales and arpeggios and go up and down these things. It was kind of scary. And
you wanted to do that too?
Yeah. And I never got there, but I'm still working on it.
No, I mean, because you really play a part. I mean, like a lot of reed players, you play everything, don't you?
Yeah, I still play clarinet and saxophone, and I'm an autodidact on the flute. So that's
You seem to play a lot of flute.
yeah, it's passable. But that was that was my route in. That was wanting to play the saxophone to get into the county wind band.
Right.
For the obvious reason that there was a girl from a different school who played in the county wind band.
So
I'm not. I'm not going to pretend that there was any kind of
well, that's good a reason as any.
Sincere artistic objective in this. But
so what age were you when you got into the band?
About 14, 15, something like that. But one of the things was that I found that saxophone was my instrument. It kind of much more than the clarinet, and so all of a sudden I didn't have the commitment to the choir anymore. So I had more time for music, or for.
You'd left because your voice broke.
And all of a sudden I just kind of got turned on to music properly again.
What kind of music were you listening to those days? Because we're talking about the kind of mid to late 70s, I guess.
You
were born in 66.
66. So I guess we're pushing now. It's only the late 70s, early 80s.
Okay.
Very early 80s. I would listen to Hump Show on the BBC.
Okay.
And take that. So I was listening to a little bit of jazz. And
That's
then
quite precocious for 17, 16.
And then I would buy random records from
jazz records.
Mixture. You know, I would buy classical clarinet records, and I would listen to those, and I would sort of try and, play Mozart clarinet quintet and so on.
Okay.
Enter music festivals and play in school concerts. And I was also buying albums at random with pictures of saxophone players on the front.
Okay, so you just pick anything up that grabbed you.
And I was kind of lucky, I picked up Coleman Hawkins record, Dexter Gordon records.
Yeah.
I heard
Coltrane.
Coltrane a little later on. I got Bird Cymbals, Charlie Parker record, Dave Brubeck. Paul Desmond is. If you're a young person interested in jazz and kind of you like singing and melody and so on, there's no one better than Paul Desmond to listen to because it's just so tuneful.
Okay.
And I was playing alto sax at that point, so he's an eminently sort of transcribable,
But
saxophone.
why jazz specifically, Jim? Because that is unusual for someone of that age. I mean, I wasn't. My father was a semi-pro jazz pianist, so
Right.
he was in the house. I was listening to, I don't know, The Clash and ABBA and God knows what. The jazz stuff was just. Was there any kind of external jazz influence that pushed you towards it?
Not overtly. My father had listened to jazz a little bit. There was a sort of handful of tapes that would be in the car.
Yeah.
One was Dizzy on the French Riviera,
Okay.
The Atomic Mr. Basie, that one with all the Kid from Red Bank and so on. There was a 10-inch vinyl of the Glenn Miller soundtrack, the soundtrack from the Glenn Miller movie.
From the movie, yeah.
So that was my idea of what jazz was from the kind of the house environment.
Right.
But
Did your contemporaries think you a little strange?
a little strange,
Interesting.
but at the same time, that wasn't.
God, that Jim's a really strange taste in music.
That wasn't the extent of my interest in music. Yeah. That wasn't the extent of my interest in music.
Yeah.
I was sort of with full adolescent enthusiasm. I was into ska and two-tone music.
Yeah, the specials. And all that.
Yeah. And one of the first things I transcribed on the saxophone would have been One Step Beyond.
Okay.
So there was other stuff going on.
Okay.
But once my clarinet teacher, saxophone teacher, got the inkling that I was interested in jazz, he kind of gave me some pointers to that. And it was kind of interesting because he was super kind of formal and rigid, and he taught me for 8 years, I suppose, and he never
called you Tomlinson.
He always called me Tomlinson. And but he was the first person who sort of showed me what a chord sequence was on, sort of basic chord sequence, 12-bar blues, or something like 5'2" Eyes of Blue, or and showed me how to write out or how to construct a sort of jazzy sounding syncopated solo based on the arpeggiation, based on the chord sequence, and that was just enough to give me an insight, to sort of give me a foot on the ladder.
But you were not, you hadn't considered at that point, I guess we're coming up to school leaving age, it's around then. Had you considered going to, a further education in music rather than, as it turned out, DP?
No, not for a second.
Not for a second?
Not for a second. My voice broke around about the same time I was choosing what O-levels, as they were then, to specialise in. And I'd already spent 5 or so years seeing my choir master, Terry Atkinson, multiple times a week. And he was the music teacher at the high school. And I'd already had enough of him.
Okay.
You know, not that there was anything wrong with him, but you know how kids are. It's like I've been there, done that. You know. So whilst I was musically active, I went to my clarinet lessons and I played in the school band and participated in the concerts. I did not want to study music.
Okay.
And so I never sort of considered that a musical career.
Because I think, for a professional musician, your career path into being a professional musician is slightly unorthodox, isn't it?
Yeah.
You don't go to music school until you're what, 22 or something?
Older. I guess was it 1991? So I would have been 24.
24, okay.
So I already.
So there was a gap between Oxford and Guildhall.
Yeah.
So, but tell me about. PPE. We should explain if we have a listener, which is probably just my mother and yours. Americans have no idea what PPE is.
Right. Well, PPE is what Bill Clinton studied. Another saxophone player. And he studied at the same college. It's a combination degree.
David Cameron did PPE.
Yeah.
Everyone does PPE.
It's a combination degree of politics, philosophy, and economics. And you sweat your way through the first year of doing all three, after which you get to decide which of those things interest you the most. Because of my mathematical incapabilities, I specialised away from economics.
A lot of musicians are terribly good at maths.
Yeah, fairly early on.
No,
I was perfectly fine at maths up to O level, and then
it all went wrong.
Then it all went wrong because I stopped doing it.
But were you playing at Oxford though?
Yeah, I had a quartet and a quintet.
And you were doing jazz, not
doing jazz, playing sort of Blue Note type covers and bebop and things like that.
And you had gigs?
We had gigs. We used to play in the college, in the bar. We used to play at balls. I used to be relatively hard-nosed about it. Although I was kind of doing it for fun and as a hobby, you would encounter the booking people for ball committees. And they'd say, "Sure, we'd love you to come and play at the ball, and we'll give you tickets." Right? And we say, "Well,
great exposure."
Yeah.
That's what they say, isn't it?
And say, "Well, it'd be hard for us to play a ball without going into it." So
anyway, we're playing, for God's sake.
Yeah.
What are we supposed to do?
How does entrance to the ball help me any? So I would always manage to sort of
get a fee out of the
negotiate some sort of fee. So,
okay. But what did you intend to do after leaving Oxford?
I actually had.
You still had no desire to pursue this profession.
I had funding from the British Academy, I think, to do a master's in philosophy.
Really?
And I decided against that. That I wanted to sort of get on with things. I moved to London. While I was at Oxford, I kind of fell amongst some musicians who were a mixture of students, graduates, and pros and semi-pros who had a band that was resident at the Ritz Hotel in London. And I started depping or substituting in that band, and eventually became a full-time member of that band. So
is that Mike Garrett's?
No, that was a band that was run by the writer and broadcaster and bass and tuba player Humphrey Carpenter. and it was a band called Vile Bodies, and we would play kind of 1920s, 30s, mixture of British and American dance band, swing band music from that era.
Okay.
And it was a lot of fun, and I got to go down to London every weekend or every other weekend, depending.
But this was just, done on a casual basis.
Done on a casual basis.
How do you earn a living?
Well, through college, I had part-time work. I worked for the college.
Right.
I was a part-time porter.
Yeah.
So, I'd be on the door, signing people in and out and sorting mail and breaking up unregistered parties and doing that sort of thing. What porters do.
Yeah.
And so I kind of funded my way through college.
From Porterhouse Blue.
Yeah, right.
Wrong university.
Yeah, King Porter Stomp.
Yeah.
There we go. So I funded my way through university that way. Then afterwards, I moved down to London, and I worked I temped. So I worked full time, but through a temping agency at the Office of Fair Trading.
Oh, really? Okay.
So yeah.
Okay.
I've signed the Official Secrets Act, so I'm not sure I can talk.
No, obviously no. I wouldn't want to.
But it was,
no.
But that sort of kept me fed and housed.
But you were gigging in the evening.
I was gigging in the evening. I signed up to go to some sort of evening sort of jazz courses at the Camden Further Education Institute. So I was kind of networking and trying to meet musicians and just sort of pursue that whilst kind of, in a sense, I suppose I was playing for time.
Well, were you? Or had you decided this is really what I want to do? I want to be a professional musician.
Well, I think at some point during the year I decided that if I was going to be involved in music, that I would like to actually put my music on a firmer foundational footing.
Right.
And that I should really just find somewhere to study.
Yes.
And at the time, there wasn't a great deal going on in jazz education in London at the time, but the Guildhall did have what they called a postgraduate diploma or something like that in jazz and studio music, which was a one-year course. And it seemed to be open to people of lots of different musical backgrounds. You didn't have to have a music degree to apply, certainly, or to get in, because I did decide to apply. I auditioned and was accepted. So that sort of set me up. So I had a year between university graduating and then going to the Guildhall.
Okay, but it was only a one-year course.
It's a one-year course, so it's it was really sort of cramming as much.
Okay, I thought it might have been longer.
Cramming as much information into
And that's where you met Stacey, of course.
I actually met Stacey before. Through some mutual friends in Oxford, and this was entirely coincidental, but she had also applied to the Guildhall.
Oh, that was just pure coincidence?
Pure coincidence, and been accepted.
Was she in the UK at that point? Last night she was talking about she graduated and left the UK the same day. She
graduated and left America.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she had gone over to Germany to work on credits for a master's degree. So she had gone to Germany to work on her German, because she was a comparative literature student. And she'd come over to Oxford to visit some friends who were on an exchange course in Oxford, and we met, and it's fairly obvious that there was an instant attraction, but our paths were on a converging
and then,
course.
Well, then did you start performing together?
Funnily enough, we didn't. And so I'll kind of fast forward a little.
Yeah.
So I was in London. Stacey moved to London to go on the Guildhall course. We were living in a similar part of town, and we went through. The course was kind of split into two halves because they had to make up bands and rhythm sections and so on, and have everything be sort of have complete rhythm sections on different divides of the course and so on. We were on opposite sides of the course, so we didn't take any classes together. And we didn't do any gigs together through that, partly because there just weren't any gigs to do. The kind of gigs that, as starting out musicians that we were getting were duo gigs in cafes and so on, and no one wants a duo of a saxophone and a singer. It's really. We're all going out and playing with guitarists or keyboard players or what have you. So
she had a residency somewhere at some point.
Yeah, at a place called Cafe Bohème.
Yeah, that's it.
Which is on. It's in Soho.
Soho.
Yeah, at the bottom of Frith Street.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. But you were gigging, and at some point you were gigging at Ronnie Scott's as well.
Yeah. So we Stacey started subbing actually with Vile Bodies.
Right.
And then, from duo gigs we would get occasional functions and we would start playing together. But when it actually came to doing, higher profile gigs, there was a fairly sort of conscious decision, I would say, on Stacey's part to have a band that we were already a couple by this point. To have a band that didn't include me, because she wanted to be a singer who was taken seriously on her own merits and as an autonomous musician, not to be not for us to be instantly a couple, a musical couple. So she had a band with she didn't have a band, but she would go out and do gigs with trios. Or she would play with Colin Oxley, guitarist, who was on the Guildhall on the same year as us.
He was at Guildhall as well.
Yeah,
okay. Yeah. But you were playing with, Garrick and Matt Waits.
Yeah.
David Newton.
Yeah.
David's been around for a long time, hasn't he?
He has, and Dave's a great pianist. And
he is, isn't he? Yeah.
Yeah. He's just got an incredible sense of time.
I love that piano solo he does on the Tender Trap. Old Stacey.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because he just lets rip, and in many ways it's untypical of Kent Tomlinson songs, which tend to be short. The solos.
Sure.
The solos are limited.
Yeah.
And then Newton just, bits of it remind me of Dudley Moore. I often listen to this thing on the Family's out.
Yeah.
Really hard.
I mean, it's definitely sort of coming...
unrestrained and unbridled.
It's coming out of that sort of Oscar Peterson or Monty Alexander style, where it's sort of... Dave's got this way where in extended solos you can go through the gears. And on that album, we brought over Jeff Hamilton.
Yeah.
And Jeff also kind of, who played with Monty and so on, has that style of playing. So there was, that was a very good hookup.
He was here a couple of years ago. I saw him with a trio.
Oh yeah.
A couple of Israeli guys.
Yeah.
Not very poorly attended.
Oh really?
Sweden.
Okay. Well, you'd have thought that at least the room would be filled up with drummers who would want to see how it's done.
Well, I mean, doesn't he do a lot of work with Elvis Costello's wife?
Diana Krall? Yeah.
Did.
I mean, for years and years. I'm not sure if he's still in the touring band, but I don't kind of follow it. But yeah.
Anyway, sorry, I got off the point, which is you were Stacey was gigging with other people. You were doing stuff with people like David.
Yeah, but essentially making a living by teaching.
Oh, you were teaching. Uh-huh.
So I basically immediately that I got out from the Guildhall, I started teaching for Haringey.
Right.
And in North London, where we were living. And I did that 91, I probably did that for about 10 years.
10 years?
So I was a peripatetic teacher. I would teach in various schools, and I would teach clarinet and saxophone, and I ran their big band for them and the junior wind band.
Okay.
So
I had no idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was
I mean, your first records start around recordings start around 97, didn't they?
Yeah. So there
this
was
one with Garrick, you know, for the love of
Duke.
Duke and Ronnie.
Yeah. And there's another one. Maybe there was one before that called Meteors Close at Hand. I don't remember.
Okay.
I mean, and the albums that I made with Mike were.
Well, there's more than one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
We would do recording sessions, and then the material from those recording sessions would come out on albums, not necessarily in the sequence in which they were recorded.
Okay. Because I think For the Love of Duke and Ronnie it's a live album, isn't it? But it was done in Ronnie Scott's. So like January 96 and January 97.
Yeah, there may be some live tracks on there.
Okay, it's not exclusively a live album. Right.
But so there was a period of sort of 5 or 6 years where we are on the London scene, trying to, get our feet under the table, get some experience, pay dues, earn a living.
And you're still not working with Stacey at this point?
No,
right.
I mean, we would do occasional functions together and so on, but in terms of being part of Stacey's working band, no.
No, okay. And is this where Humphrey Lyttelton comes in? Or was that a bit later?
So, in now I have to do this, around about 95, Stacey and I, and the rest of the band was Colin Oxley on guitar, Dave Newton on piano, Dave Green on bass, and Mark Taylor on drums.
Right.
We did what you did in those days, which is we went into the studio to record a demo. And a demo that you would send around to clubs and so on and try and get gigs. And so Dave Green, I believe it was, who was playing with us, and in whose trio I was at that point. Dave had a trio with me, Dave Newton, and himself. Suggested that Stacey send the tape to Humph.
Okay.
And then Humph fell in love with her.
Okay.
And entirely contrary to BBC policy, because it wasn't a properly released album, he rather naughtily played a couple of tracks on his show, and gave Stacey a big shout out, and that was really the first thing that sort of made Stacey sort of be known to the jazz public beyond London.
Can you remember what the songs were?
I'm pretty sure he played definitely Day In, Day Out. The other one, can't remember.
Okay, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's what a terrific piece of luck.
Unbelievable.
Because that never happens, does it?
No. It's. I mean, it'd be. It was actually there's a kind of triple whammy with that demo, which kind of set things off, or set Stacey's career off. One was sending it to Humph, and Humph
actually listening to it.
Yeah, listening to it, and
that's 99% of it.
Yeah, and championing, and then going on to sort of champion Stacey.
Yeah.
The other one was she sent the tape to Alan Bates of Candid Records, and that got Alan interested.
Right.
And I think maybe a year later we recorded the first album for Candid.
Right.
Yeah. And the other one was she sent a tape to a jazz journalist called Richard Cook, who was at the time A&Ring at Polygram. And although there was, he wasn't in a position to sign Stacey, he forwarded the tape to the producers of Ian McKellen's film of Richard III, which was going on at the time. So the reason there's a connection there is that Ian McKellen was doing a film version of his theatre production of Richard III, which was sort of set in Nazi Germany in the 1930s.
Oh, that rings a bell. Yes.
And London Records, which was part of Polygram, had contracted to release the soundtrack of the film.
Right.
And they wanted to produce an opening scene for the movie in which all of the characters arrive, just to set character and set scene before he went into the opening soliloquy of "Now is the winter of our discontent," which was actually framed as a speech given at a ball to celebrate the end of the war, the end of the War of the Roses.
Yeah.
Right? So they commissioned the guy who was doing the music for the film to set to music a Marlowe sonnet, the "Come live with me and be my love."
Okay.
It's like the ode to the shepherd, the shepherd to his girlfriend or whatever, in a sort of 1930s style.
Right.
And because we had this connection with Vile Bodies, and we were known for playing music of that era, and because the tape had gone to Richard Cook, who was connected with London Records, who were putting out the soundtrack of this, they forwarded the tape to the producers of the film, or the director, Richard Longcrane, and to Ian McKellen. And because Stacey actually has a pretty kind of natural and authentic sounding kind of voice that's kind of could plausibly be from the 1930s, and back then there was a little more of that kind of influence in Stacey's voice. There's a sort of in the terminal vibrato and so on. There's a little kind of frisson of Mildred Bailey or something in the way she sang. They just jumped at it. It's like, great, that's the voice for this song.
So she sang this?
Yeah. So
this exists somewhere.
Yeah, it's on the DVD.
Is that right?
She's there.
Right? I had no idea.
So
yeah, the film music.
And so that track.
And you're playing on that as well.
That track is out there, and I'm playing lead alto and clarinet.
That's the first recorded piece you really did together.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Commercially released.
Okay. Around about 95.
Yeah. So you can get the DVD, or you can see it on YouTube.
But it's on YouTube. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So
and then what else? I mean, Humphrey. How else did Humphrey help you?
Well,
I know he wrote liner notes and things, didn't he?
Yeah, he wrote liner notes for Stacey's first album, and obviously was a champion in terms of talking about her and playing the music on his radio show.
On Radio 2, wasn't it?
Yeah. And,
the Americans will never understand this.
No.
Radio 2? What's he talking about?
Yeah. I guess the closest thing that you would have in America to Humph would be, a journalist like Michael Bourne on WBGO, who are so kind of respected and known and listened to nationally.
Is that the Boston station?
They're in Newark. That they have a kind of curatorial role. Yeah. Tastemaker.
Yeah. But I mean, Humphrey Lyttelton, again, we should explain that Humphrey Lyttelton was a very big figure in British jazz, wasn't he?
Yeah. Humph was
and a super clever and funny guy.
Yeah.
I mean, those monologues at the start of I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue are some of the funniest things you'll ever hear on radio.
Yeah. So
Humph, that deadpan delivery.
Yeah. Humph was a
was
star
he like that
of
in real life?
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah. It was. He would just knock you flat every time with one-liners, or just with a look at the eye, or
Yeah.
But Humph was a star of the jazz revival in the 1950s, of the trad jazz revival, and rather controversially, he became a mainstream musician, a traitor to the to the trad tradition. So much so that when he engaged, who's the alto player? It's gone. But when he changed his band and included saxophone in his band, there were people there were signs hung across the motorway as they were going up that said, "Go home, dirty boppers." This is how partisan the jazz scene was back in the 60s. But then he also had a secondary career as a writer and a radio host of comedy and music.
And then, I mean, in 2000, you made a record with him, didn't you? Between Friends.
Yeah. So
you and Stacey.
So the actual the playing
Mm.
association with Humph began actually first for me because Humph's longtime tenor saxophone player, Kathy Stobart, who's another northerner like me, she's from South Shields, she was having a hip replacement operation. So Humph would announce this. Kathy Stobart is not here because she's having her hip replaced. Says with what, I don't know, but but so I was brought in to.
She's on the record there, actually.
Yeah, she is. So I was brought in to sub for Kathy for 3 or 4 months while she was out of action.
Okay.
And
you're playing everything: tenor, alto, baritone, bass,
yeah,
clarinet.
crazy.
Everything. No flute, mate.
And I didn't play flute at that.
Oh, you weren't playing flute then?
No. Pretty sure I wasn't. And so when I was subbing for Kathy, Stacey would come on the road sometimes just to hang out and come to the gig. And so Humph invited her to sit in. And then the idea for this show came about that we would, that Humph would go out on the road with his own band, augmented by myself and Stacey, and we would write some arrangements that were built around Stacey and so on, and that's how that album came about.
Yeah, because Stacey's on this, isn't she?
Yeah.
I didn't really notice that before.
Yeah. So it's actually a larger band than Humph's band generally was.
Okay. Let's wind back a little bit.
Sure.
3 years. We'll talk about. We're not going to have time to talk about all these lovely records. But, the beginning bit is interesting. Just briefly, Stacey's first record, "Close Your Eyes," and your first record,
yeah,
as a quartet.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. That was with Candid.
It was.
And how did that happen?
Well, Stacey had sent
this demo.
The demo tape to Alan Bates. Alan had kind of shown an interest, and there was a sort of 6-month period of deciding whether or not he wanted to sign us and whether or not we wanted to be signed. And eventually we signed and we went into the studio. And one of the most felicitous things about that, other than just being the first record that we made and it was well received, was that I believe it was Dave Green who actually didn't play bass on the record because he was out of the country when we were recording it, but Dave suggested that we use a studio down in Sussex that was run by Curtis Schwartz. He said he recorded there and had nice results and it was a nice place to go. And that began a beautiful friendship because we basically record every album that we've done ever since at Curtis's.
Okay.
And so Curtis is, in a sense, like a sixth member of the band. He's a great engineer, great musician in his own right, and a good friend. So.
Okay. So you always record in the UK, basically?
Yeah.
Yeah. And Curtis.
And so we had this kind of nice set up arrangement relationship with Curtis, so that everything is super comfortable when we record.
Did you do I Know I Dream there?
We recorded some of it.
Some of it.
Yeah. The orchestra was recorded at Angel Studios, because Curtis's isn't big enough to accommodate an orchestra.
I mean, Close Your Eyes was extremely successful, wasn't it? Wasn't it the best-selling jazz album of '97 or something like that?
Yeah.
Or am I getting it mixed up with something else?
To be honest, I don't think it was, but might have been in the UK.
Yeah.
And there was, I think the following album, this was in the early days of the internet, and Candid Records was a small kind of boutique label without big distribution. One of the things that happened was that Stacey's first album came to the notice of the producers of a TV show, CBS Sunday Morning, which was a very, back then it was a huge national kind of magazine program. It was like what everyone watched on a Sunday morning.
Yeah.
And the producers of that show got interested in Stacey's story of being, an American in Europe, abroad. How unlikely is it that an American goes to Europe to start a jazz career, and basically sort of put together the story of how it all happened.
Right.
And so they followed us around for a little while and put together this documentary piece.
Okay.
And
after the record was released.
After the record was released, but the thing kind of exploded in America, but it was hardly distributed. So what happened was that in the early days of Amazon, people used Amazon to go and get the record.
Okay.
So we were talking before we were rolling about the effects of the internet and changing business models on musicians' lives. The internet at the outset of our career, before we had sort of mainstream distribution, enabled us to reach out to fans and to be able to sell CDs and get our CDs out there. So it was the album was listed. I think it was actually The Tender Trap, which was out by the time the CBS Sunday Morning show aired. It was listed in the top 5 or top 10 CD sales on Amazon for 1998 or something.
Okay, right. I think you've had an awful lot of luck in your career. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean,
I know you make your own luck, but and of course,
Well, I genuinely believe that if you look at any kind of successful person, there will be a strong element of luck, because
that's not to detract from your obvious talent, of course. But luck. It seems to have played an enormous part in your career, and there's some other examples of that later on.
Yeah,
but right at the beginning, you get noticed by Humph. You get the Americans following you around, and you're on network television.
Yeah.
The CD sells like crazy for a new artist. It's astonishing.
Every step, I would say, from the very outset of meeting Stacey, has been serendipitous. Which is not to say that, from the point of view of how you kind of analyze your career and progress. You look at yourself at point A and you find yourself at point B, and you kind of recreate the steps of how you got between those 2 points. And luck plays a part, and those are the things that are kind of most noticeable to the outside world when you tell your story, because no one wants to be bored with a list of all the complaints and difficulties and frustrations that you have to overcome in the meantime. But so there are those as well.
Yeah, sure.
But
I'm conscious of your time, Jim, because it's already 1 o'clock.
Okay.
I don't know how much time you've got.
Well,
I've got loads of.
I can keep going, and
keep going. Let me ask you about these 3 albums of yours as leading.
Sure.
I think it's 3. And the first one is Only Trust Your Heart. You mentioned it. You did that for Candid as well.
Yep.
You got a very good review, I noticed. And Humphrey Lyttelton did the liner notes.
Yeah.
And we've all got, we've got Collins on guitar again. What are your thoughts about that album? I had sort of slightly backhanded compliment from All Music Review. On the whole, a fine album, but its very inoffensiveness might actually be a shortcoming. How do you look back on it now? You know, goodness, 20 years later, actually.
Yeah,
21 years later.
First of all, I never listened to it except by accident.
Okay.
I don't sort of. I don't intentionally cannibalize myself.
No. Yeah.
What I remember of it, so I like the repertoire. I think it's reflective of my musical tastes. It's reflective of my sort of musical leanings, which are at that time were probably more conservative than they are now.
Well, it's all the great American songbook, isn't it? Apart from, I mean, there's a European number.
Yeah, there's a head there on there called Making Brownies that I wrote.
Yeah, that's yours.
Over the changes of Sweet Georgia Brown.
Yeah.
Colin Oxley wrote a blues for it.
Yeah.
Which I think is called Blue Corners on the album.
It is called Blue Corners. Yes. Stacey's on 3 of the tracks.
Yeah. And
why did you bring Stacey in on that album rather than make it a wholly instrumental record?
Well, I think this goes to a kind of larger question about how it is that I perceive myself as a musician, because I don't think of myself as a saxophonist.
What do you think?
Who arranges, who does this, that, and the other. And I think I had an inkling of it back then, but now it's much clearer to me. It's like I have a much sort of more holistic kind of sense of what I am as a musician. I feel like a musician who expresses that vocation, sometimes through playing the saxophone, sometimes through writing, sometimes through arranging, a lot of the time through producing. You know, that in a sense that I am concerned much more than just standing up in front of a band and playing a few choruses.
Yeah. Because you've anticipated one of my final questions, actually.
Okay.
But it's exactly that. You know, what of these many different hats that you wear? You know, Tomlinson as player, composer, arranger, producer,
right,
performer. Which of those things do you enjoy the most? Get the most satisfaction from? It's probably a silly question, actually, because
not really, but I'm actually a pretty in the moment kind of person, and I get the most satisfaction from whatever I'm doing at the time.
Okay.
You know, I love to practice. I love just to play the saxophone with no other end than just for playing the saxophone.
Yeah.
I'd love to open up a book of Anderson flute studies and, you know, see if I can get better.
Okay.
I love to delve into multi-tracks and, you know, and edit and mess around and, you know, produce albums.
But you weren't always wearing these hats simultaneously, were you?
And I have...
It's something that's grown and grown, isn't
yeah,
it?
and
which
I think that's...
probably the epitome of it now is I Know I Dream, because
Sure.
Your finger is in every aspect of that pie.
Yeah, and I think in a sense that has been a progressive course of my career, which is that I have, as I've gone along, I've picked up the skills that I've needed to get closer and closer to the musical vision that Stacey and I share, that want to present. And so, for instance, it's much easier to write an arrangement rather than to describe an arrangement that you want someone else to write. It's much easier to edit, a series of takes of orchestral passes, than to sit there with your arms folded, asking someone else to do it.
There must be a big difference between arranging for a quartet and arranging for a 52-piece orchestra.
Sure.
Where did that skill come from?
Fortunately, on the album, most of the arrangements are written by colleague Tommy Lawrence.
Yeah, Tommy Lawrence, yeah.
Who is a fantastic musician and who shares a lot of the same sort of musical aesthetic. If you were to ask me, who is your favorite arranger for orchestra? Well, you'd have to go Johnny Mandel, Klaus Ogerman, the kind of the minimalist arrangers, who are coming at it from a jazz point of view. And that was the case with Tommy. So it was very easy to present Tommy with the repertoire, with small band arrangements, with, in the case of Bullet Train, like a complete recorded rhythm section track, and ask him to orchestrate.
Right, okay.
You settle on a tonal palette, which is kind of like the Mandel formula of, low flutes, French horns, strings, and keyboard vibes. It's all very kind of pastel, and you go, that's our tonal palette, let's go.
Okay.
The song is the focus, not the arrangement.
Yeah.
And we communicated very efficiently with Tommy. And in terms of me learning how to write arrangements, a couple of books. And listening to records, you go.
It's dead easy, actually.
It's not. It really is not, and it takes me forever.
Arranging for dummies.
Yeah. If only there were.
If only there were. You should write one, actually.
Yeah.
Can I ask you about Brazilian Sketches as well?
Yeah,
of course. That's a terrific little album as well. It's recorded 2.5 years after Only Trust Your Heart. Now we're getting very Brazilian, aren't we?
Right. Sure.
The title suggests.
Sure.
But what prompted that? I mean, again, it's rather ambitious, isn't it? These are terribly well-known songs.
Yeah.
Most of them are known backwards.
Right.
You decide to do an instrumental tribute to these pieces.
Well,
what was your thinking?
If anyone who's heard my saxophone playing will not be surprised to know that I love Stan Getz. And so I've been listening to Getz's recordings of Brazilian music forever. And to be honest, I love to play bossa nova, jazz samba. One of the reasons is that it's a music which is expressed in two, which means that because the bass is moving in two, it kind of feels it's automatically it's got this smooth underlay to it, and you automatically feel as if you have space to play.
Yeah.
And I paradoxically, you also have space not to play. It's like the melodies are so beautiful.
Yes.
It's like if you play a Jobim melody as written with a little bit of feeling, not too much feeling, with a little bit of feeling, it just sounds great because it's fantastically written music. So as a jazz player, you've got everything that you want, really. Or as a jazz player, for me, for my taste, for my style of playing, it's like you have great kind of source material, harmonic and melodic. And also as a kind of arranging project, I guess I produced the album, so as a producing project, there's a lot of tracks where I'm not putting myself kind of front and center as the track. It's like the saxophone. What I'm doing is a color. What's important are the songs, are the melodies, and so on. It's not a jazz record in the sense of let's get through this melody because I want to hear what you can do over these changes. No, I actually want to kind of present these songs, present this music. And I think that also comes from my background as a singer.
Okay, right.
Like words and music have always had a magical relationship to me. That when something is well written, whether it's a standard, whether it's an original song, whether it's church music, whatever it is, if the words and the music go together, something alchemistic can happen that makes the result so much greater than the sum of the parts. So even when I'm playing instrumental music, I always have this kind of fidelity to the song, including the lyrics, kind of in the back of my mind.
Okay. Okay. Let me ask you about the lyric, which is your third album as leader.
Yeah.
And that was the winner of the 2006 BBC Jazz Award.
Yes.
And again, it also got very good reviews. I mean, I think you said somewhere, I think it was on your blog.
Right.
Which you've probably forgotten about, but I'll show you it exists, because I've been reading it.
Okay.
Back for JimTomlinson.net, everybody.
Okay.
So you can read stuff that Jim wrote and is completely forgotten about.
Yeah, I really must
about
update.
12 years old.
Yeah,
I don't know why you stopped, actually, because it's rather interesting. I enjoyed it. And then suddenly it stops.
Yeah.
It stops as quickly as it starts.
I think I had a
good read.
There you go.
Yeah, did you get it?
Yeah.
Get
there
it?
you go. Yeah.
A good read.
Yeah.
Double E.
Okay. Now that there are
Still
platforms where you can sort of simply design your own website, I should do that again.
You should, you should.
Yeah.
You should. But I think, anyway, I think you mentioned in that blog that the lyric is possibly the album you're most proud of. And I wondered why.
Okay, well, I guess the first answer, because at the time I wrote it, it was the most recent one.
Yeah, no,
so,
in fact, I know jazzers always say that, don't
which
their favourite record was always the most recent one.
I guess this goes back to what I was saying earlier, is that as I've progressed, my notion of myself as a musician has kind of broadened from being a jazz saxophonist to being a musician who plays jazz saxophone, who arranges, who produces, who edits, and so on, and who is primarily interested in song-based jazz, whether it's instrumental or not. And I think that was kind of the first album where I think I felt like I'd sort of... Stacey gave me kind of... I should say it's not an instrumental album.
No,
it's 12 tracks, of which I think 10 have Stacey singing.
Yeah. And then she's whistling on the other one.
Yeah. There you go. That it's the first album where I was able to kind of give full expression to, or give fuller expression to that aesthetic that I was driving for. Uh-huh. And I'm still driving for, and it get closer in a sense with each subsequent album.
Okay. But you, nonetheless, despite having moved on, it's still an album that you're very happy with.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other thing is that all of Stacey's previous albums, this was the first album that we recorded where it was trio and saxophone.
Yeah.
The other albums were kind of recorded and arranged in a sense where, as the albums went along and I was having more and more input, sort of more and more responsibility, as it were, as arranger and producer, I was actually playing less. I was sort of on Stacey's albums more in a cameo kind of a way, on this track or that track, not like all over the place.
Yeah.
Whereas this was the first album that kind of, in a studio sense, set out to say this is the kind of the relationship between the song and my saxophone playing that is I'd like to kind of put out there.
Okay, because I think this album, I think it's another one that did very well. Let me read it. I found this review by John Fordham in The Guardian in 2006. It's real sort of, it's a funny review.
All of John's reviews of us are.
Hard-nosed jazzers will grow.
Right.
You know, but Kent and Tomlinson, in the manner of the late Stan Getz, he's talking about him playing contrapuntally in the manner of Gilbert's Getz. I've always had a blah 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 blah. Stacey Kent's demure girlish murmur isn't for everybody.
I think,
I hate reviews like this, actually. What is the point?
You'd have to ask John, but that's essentially, John has a certain take on music, and he has a strong normative, I think, take on music, what it should be. But that's essentially the same review that John has written for every album we've ever done.
Yeah, because there's a kind of subtext to that.
Which is, if you paraphrase it, it's good if you like that sort of thing.
Exactly.
And
does that sort of there's a kind of sniffiness about the stuff that you and Stacey do, it seems to me. And not
in a sense.
Does that are you bothered by that?
No, not necessarily. No, not really, because we don't set out to please all of the people all of the time.
No.
But you would hope when you're reviewed that the reviewers pay the courtesy of taking the music on its own merits. And reviews that say this is okay if you like this sort of thing, right? I would much rather, or it would be much more interesting to read, right? I don't like this kind of music because, right, X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, of its kind, it is good for this reason, or this is what this music is, and it's bad for this reason. But it seems to be a little.
I mean, I think I've got a theory that reviews are an utter waste of time. Actually,
I did see some interesting
in terms of selling music.
I saw some interesting research, which concluded, correctly or otherwise, that whether reviews are good or bad is irrelevant to the sale of a film, an album, a book.
Yeah.
Right. It's the quantity of reviews.
Yeah.
Which is intuitively right because.
Do you think that's right?
Because things that are big tend to get saturation coverage.
Okay. Yeah.
But it may actually be right, but for reasons the other way round. That things get saturation coverage because they're big.
Yeah, because I think this is a good example, because this kind of review tells me everything about John Ford and nothing about you.
Right.
And it certainly wouldn't stop me buying a record. I mean, I'm interested in the quantity of reviews matters, and I take your point. I think you're probably right. I find it slightly defeating because then the 57th review of someone's record,
right,
is not going to make me buy it.
Right.
I'm kind of interested. I'm aware of I've noticed that they've got a new disc out because of the digital platforms. I can just sample it. I don't need to read 60 reviews of Swedish jazzers.
Yeah. And a
record that's only going to sell 50 copies.
I think that's partly one of the reasons that the space in newspapers for writing about niche musics like jazz is getting smaller and smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
The review section in The Guardian used to be much, much bigger. You would have, tens of album reviews in a week. Now, John gets, 2 inches of column space once a week.
Yeah.
And
most of it's online, isn't it?
Right.
Once the paywall goes up, that's going to...
Yeah.
No one will be reading it anyway, will they?
No. And so... but this is kind of one of the reasons why I think maybe that, blog formats are actually going to be more interesting than, or more important for music in terms of actual serious writing than the newspapers.
Yeah.
Because you can actually have a little more sorting and matching, so that people who are interested in vocal jazz can have a blog where people write seriously about vocal jazz, and you don't have to get through this wall of the kind of if you like this sort of thing wall, right? I don't listen to free jazz. It's not my interest, and I don't need to read a blog about free jazz.
No. Who does?
By the same token, I don't want to read reviews of Diana Krall by people who only like free jazz. You don't want it, that doesn't advance anybody's kind of knowledge. Or,
of course, yeah. Just one thing about the lyric. I think it was on Token, which is your label.
Yes.
Sometimes it appears as O+. I don't know what O+ is.
O+ is a French label that licensed it for the French release.
For the French release, okay.
It's currently released by Warner.
But is it? Because it's not. I was trying to listen to it on Spotify, and I couldn't download it either.
Oh, okay. I'll check that out. I mean, Warner has the license for it right now. Yeah.
It seems to be dead.
Okay.
It appears on the list. The artwork appears, but the tracks are not played.
All right, I'll check it out. And
it's kind of fadey.
Right.
And it's not on iTunes either.
That might be why the royalties have all but vanished, diminished.
Well, that may well have something to do with it. Yeah, the fact that you can't actually listen to it. What a pity, because I was hoping there was a dead record and that you'd give it to me.
Well, when I get it back from Warner,
when you get it back, you see, they're big record companies. They don't care about artists.
Yeah.
And you must have. You left Candid, I guess. I don't know whether you expressed. Again, you wrote a little bit about this. You expressed some dissatisfaction with Candid, which is, I guess, why you set up your own label.
Sure.
Yeah. Do you have other artists on Token?
No. It was set up solely for the purposes of releasing or for producing Stacey's and my recordings.
Okay. And now, is it dead now?
No, it's I still, if you're into this sort of thing, all of Stacey's albums from the lyric onwards have Token ISRC codes. Everything is right. We own everything.
Yeah, okay.
That we do.
You license it to Sony.
Yeah.
Blue Note.
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
So,
how are you doing? Can I move on to your collaboration?
Sure, of course.
Last night at the Nobel Museum, you and Stacey talked very comprehensively and interestingly about your collaboration with Kazuo Ishiguro, the novelist. We can't explain who the hell he is, can we? If you don't know who he is,
yeah,
you're never gonna know.
Yeah, look him up. Look him up online.
Google him, okay? Yeah. This Japanese guy. So I don't really want to talk about that.
Right.
If you're interested in Jim's collaboration with Ishiguro, you can Google it and there'll be a ton of stuff. There's massive pieces written by Ishiguro himself in The Independent and The Guardian, and there's endless interviews with Stacey about it.
Yeah.
So I want to pick, just to be a bit perverse, the collaborations with some other people, and two are writing collaborations and the others are musical collaborations, what we might call instrumental collaborations. And the first, you admitted, again this is from your blog, you say, I'm no great wordsmith, I have a pretty good understanding of how words and music can work, they're magic on one another, but as far as writing a lyric goes, forget it. So although you'd written songs, tunes, their description, songs with no lyrics in the past, you felt you had to collaborate with someone in order to produce songs.
Yes.
So Ish was the first one you you teamed up with.
Yeah.
And that's still going strong, very, very strong.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next chap is Cliff Goldmacher, an American songwriter. I'm in touch with Cliff actually because he's going to be my next figure.
Oh, okay.
And he says hello to you.
Oh, hello, Cliff.
Yeah, we just exchanged emails. He says he's working with you in New York in June.
Yeah.
And with Cliff, you wrote "Make It Up," which is on "I Know I Dream." Although it's a song that we've been performing for some time before
Yes.
that. And you also wrote the eponymous "I Know I Dream" together. I love "Make It Up."
Thank you.
It rattles around my head several times a day.
Yeah.
I told Cliff, and he just said, "I love it when it happens." I kind of brushed my teeth to it,
Really?
I'm thinking it, and I thought it's ridiculous. I wish it
feel
would go away sometimes.
I always feel like I should apologise when that happens.
I think you bloody well should. It's ruining my life.
Yeah.
But tell me about that process. I mean, you talked a lot last night about how you actually to and fro of writing songs with Ishiguro.
Yeah.
And to what extent is it a similar process with people like Cliff? But actually, how did you meet Cliff?
So,
because Cliff is based in the US, isn't he?
He is.
In Sonoma, in California. I
That's
think.
right. Yeah. Cliff and I met for the first time. Goodness me. It would have been in 2013-ish. Stacey and I were playing a couple of concerts in California, and we played an outside concert in Los Gatos, and Cliff was in attendance, and he just came up to me after the show and said that he loved the songs that I was writing with Ishiguro and that he was a songwriter, and he name-checked a few of the people that he'd worked with, like Larry Goldings, who, is playing here in Stockholm in a few weeks.
Oh, is he?
So definitely worth coming down to hear him with Pete Bernstein and I can't remember.
Because Cliff is interesting because he writes across a range of genres, doesn't he?
He does.
He's by no means is exclusively a jazz man.
No, exactly. He writes a lot of standard type songs, a lot of Americana. He's worked with all kinds of
country as well.
Folk, country, rock singers, and so on. He's, if you're interested, he's given very interesting TED talk.
I know, I've seen one. Yeah,
on songwriting.
Yeah.
And like me, he has a background in politics and economics. So before music. So we kind of we hit it off anyway, and had a fairly.
This is Lady Luck.
It's cliff making love. But we had a fairly sort of long email courtship because I'm on the road a lot and I'm hard to pin down. But eventually we met up in New York and started writing. So the process of writing with Cliff is not 100% dissimilar to that with Ish, namely that he always goes first. And so I'll show up to a songwriting session, and he's already got a lyric in the offing.
Is he purely a lyricist, or does he?
No, he writes music as well. And we will work through the lyric and talk about it, and we amend it, and we sort of have a collaborative process in terms of refining the lyric. And then
you tend to be in the same room.
We're in the same room.
It seems with Ishiguro it's more of a remote process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with Cliff being in the same room, then it's my job to kind of put this to music. And
can you do that? Isn't that rather difficult?
It is difficult,
and it's constrained by time.
For sure, but it actually kind of forces you to work in a different way, which is to go with your instincts a little more wholeheartedly, reflect a little less, and the aim is over the course of 2 or 3 3-hour songwriting sessions to have a couple of songs pretty much off the ground,
Right.
sounding like songs.
Yeah.
There's a new song which we might play tonight that I've written with Cliff called "Thinking About the Rain,"
Right.
which we started in our songwriting sessions last December. And I kind of got the germ of the idea in the songwriting session, fleshed it out, and then I've just been kind of refining it, tinkering with it, you know. And also for me, because I'm an arranger, I don't just sort of put a melody and some chord symbols to a song before I think, okay, this is ready. I'm actually it's a kind of multi-layered process where the composition and the arrangement kind of happen simultaneously.
Right.
So that I'm not so that I'm making lots of different kinds of decisions about the song as I go along, in terms of framing the lyric, framing the mood, you know, all sorts of kind of detailed things.
Okay. So it's a much faster process than working with the Ishiguro.
Yeah, I'm not sure it takes any fewer hours,
Okay.
but I think it's more accelerated at the beginning, and then
Is it made easier by the fact that the lyrics are, you know, this is, I mean, I think Cliff's lyrics are great, actually,
Yeah.
because you know what you buy, you know, it does what it says on the tin.
Sure.
You know, the history and story every day. You know, I mean, they're love songs, aren't they?
yeah.
You know, but they're not. I mean, they don't smack of this sort of melancholia and
Right.
loss, and all the things that you were talking about last night in the case of Ishiguro. So I wonder whether that makes it easier for you to set them to music.
I think certainly the fact that Cliff's lyrics are much more.
Well, I only know two, of course, because I don't know
Of course, yeah.
because
They're
only
much
two
more
that we-
tightly structured.
Yeah.
Like the structure of the song is written into the lyric. It's not something that you have to kind of infer over a process of familiarization.
Yeah.
When he writes it, it's clear what the verse and what the refrain is. It's like, there it is. That's the song form, and that's what we're going to work to. In terms of the mood, obviously, "Make It Up" is kind of cheerful. You know, and there's an almost an ironic twist to it. Actually, I find I Know I Dream quite dark. It has a similar kind of. It's got a sort of Ishiguro element to it. There is something in that song that there's something out of reach. Right? The paradox in "I Know I Dream" is that you can only reach your paramour when you're asleep.
And then let me ask you about Antonio Ladero, who is a Portuguese poet. Brazilian poet, sorry.
Portuguese.
He's Portuguese.
He is Portuguese.
But lives in Lubbock, Texas,
Yeah.
which is where Buddy Holly came from.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
So
What on earth?
he
What's
lives-
going on
He
here? What's
lives
going
in
on here?
Lubbock because he is the head of the Portuguese and Spanish faculty at the university there, which is, I can't remember the name of the university.
Okay.
So he's an academic.
Okay.
And
And
the
there
poet.
are two songs with Antonio.
Yes.
Both of which are in Portuguese.
Yes.
And one is The Train, and the other one is Open the Gate.
O Comboio.
Yeah, Dark.
That's the train.
O Comboio, yeah.
And
Once again, and it's my.
Mais uma vez.
I can't do Portuguese to save my life, but you can.
There's actually three. There's another one called A Tarde, the afternoon.
What's that on?
It's on The Changing Lights.
It's on The Changing Lights?
It's a little duo number that Stacey does with Menescal.
Okay, I think I've got a duff version of Changing Lights because I can't find it.
Oh, okay.
The Ice Hotel is on my version.
Okay, shouldn't be.
It should be. I know it should be.
I'll send you a link.
Send me an MP3 of it.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. So you're with Antonio. You've been writing songs in Portuguese.
Yeah. So
What prompted you to do that?
Stacey and I, Stacey, as I mentioned before, was a comparative literature student, which, if you don't know what that is. It's basically they study literature in different languages. So Stacey speaks French, Italian, and German. She did when I met her.
Yeah.
And she always had the ambition to go back to Middlebury, where she did summer schools, immersion courses in her in the summers during her university years, to go back and study Portuguese. Stacey had some health issues in 2007, and things went higher up the bucket list, or the bucket list, seemed a little more important to pursue, and so we decided to basically to not tour in the summers, but to apply to go to Middlebury,
Right.
to study Portuguese,
Yeah.
which she'd always wanted to do, and which was great for her because she's a linguist, and it was more.
But you went as well, didn't you?
I did. And more of a challenge for me because I'm not, although I've subsequently become so. But Middlebury has a 7-week immersion course.
Yeah.
And in that 7 weeks you cover the equivalent of a year's university.
That must have been a pretty full-on experience.
It's incredibly intensive.
You're dreaming in Portuguese by the end of it.
You sign a contract at the beginning when you arrive to speak only Portuguese. Everything that you do is conducted in Portuguese. Every waking hour that you have is supervised activity, unless it's private study, in Portuguese.
Right.
And it's an incredibly effective way of drilling in a new language or improving a language that you already speak.
Is this place in the US?
It's in Middlebury, Vermont.
Yeah, okay.
And we did that for 3 summers consecutively.
3 summers, Michael.
And we've spent a great deal of time in the intervening months, and subsequently in Brazil and Portugal. We have friends like Marcus Valle and Roberto Maniscal, with whom we speak exclusively in Portuguese.
But I mean, there was an obvious logic. I mean, does it not, your desire and Stacey's to learn Portuguese, does it not come from this deep interest in Brazilian music? Does it come from
For me, that was the carrot.
That was. And that suddenly was that. We'd run out of time. We'd spent 30 or 40 minutes more than we should have done having our discussions. So Jim had to rush off to a sound check for the gig that he and Stacey were playing that night in Stockholm. But we agreed that we would reconvene either through the wonders of the internet, using something like Skype, or face-to-face when Jim and Stacey come back to Sweden in the autumn of 2018 for a mini tour. So please do join us for part 2, even though we're not entirely sure when it will be, because I know we're going to be talking about some great stuff and some really terrific musicians like the wonderful Marcus Valle from Brazil, and indeed many other Brazilians. Thank you for listening, and please do join me on the next podcast.